Dear Victoria, I recently came out to my friends as a 5 on the Kinsey Scale. Do you think this scale and others like it are useful, or are they unnecessary complications? Thank you, Dan. Hello Dan, let's get into it. For those of you who don't know what the Kinsey Scale is, I'm going to put a link to the Wikipedia article down below, but I'm also going to talk you through it briefly. Alfred Kinsey was one of the world's first, if not the first, sexologist, and there was a film made about part of his life, starring Liam Neeson. And it's a wonderful film, and you should definitely go and watch it if you are into that sort of history. Depending on how you read his life, Alfred Kinsey was perhaps most famous and most well known for his works on human sexuality. And as a part of his work on human sexuality, he developed the Kinsey Scale. The Kinsey Scale was a scale from 0 to 6, which attempted to measure human sexual orientation in a way that was a little more precise than just saying straight, gay, bisexual. The way the scale effectively worked was if you were 0, then you were exclusively heterosexual, if you were a 6, you were exclusively homosexual, and if you were 3, you were bisexual. The numbers 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 were kind of shades of grey. Their precise definitions can be found on the Wikipedia article that I have linked below, but basically it discussed being predominantly something with incidental or more than incidental something else, depending on where on the scale the number falls. For its time, I suppose the Kinsey Scale would have been quite revolutionary, because people would have only been used to saying that a person was normal or queer because he lived in rather conservative North American times. But is it still relevant today? I don't know. The relevance of the scale is something I'll get onto in a minute, but first I would like to talk about my personal attitude towards it, and that is that it's actually quite fantastic. It's a really good tool for opening up a person's mind to the idea of human sexuality being fluid, and it is my belief that human sexuality is fluid, not rigid. That is to say that a person, an individual, is capable of all different kinds of sexual expression, sexual identity, and sexual experience in their lifetime. They don't just have to be in a single category or a single box. Of course, if a person chooses to be, they can be in a single category or a single box if that's what works for them and that's what makes them comfortable. I would personally consider myself to be a Kinsey 5, although in my lifetime I have had exclusively sexual relations with men. I brand myself a 5 because I would like to think that I wouldn't be restricting myself in any way, shape or form. For all I know, there may one day is what I wanted to say then, take 2. You know what I'm going to say. There may one day be an occasion where I want to be with a woman intimately. I don't see it happening in the very near future, but I don't like the idea of closing off my mind to that sort of experience, because at the age of 25, nearly 26 years... What's wrong with me today? At the age of 25, nearly 26 years old, I still consider myself to be very young, and I shouldn't be slamming any doors at this young age. Personally, I really like introducing the Kinsey Scale to people who aren't familiar with it already, and I have encountered, more often than not, people who don't know what the Kinsey Scale is, and so it's a really good talking point in that way. It opens up their mind, as I say, to thinking about their sexuality, and thinking about human sexuality in a way that they might not have before. Previous to knowing about the Kinsey Scale, they might have just gone with one word, you know, one definition, one thing that they consider themselves to be, without necessarily considering any fluidity or shades of grey, which is what, personally, I think the Kinsey Scale is really all about. As for the relevance of the Kinsey Scale today, that's definitely debatable, because there are things that the Kinsey Scale does not take into account. For instance, gender identity. It has nothing to do with gender identity at all, and most people would agree these days that gender identity has a very big impact or a very big influence, or just has a lot to do with a person's sexual identity and sexual practices, sexual life, sex life. Sex life. We'll go with that. Gender identity taking into account things like trans men and trans women, people who consider themselves to be intersex for one reason or another, people who consider themselves to be asexual are not really catered for on the scale, although there are some updated versions of the scale that employ an X to denote asexual, but that wasn't Kinsey's original idea. That's been added later by the Institute. There are, as Dan mentioned, or implied rather, all sorts of other scales and graphs and charts that have been invented, formulated by people, and that some people do use, and if you follow some of the links on the Wikipedia article, I'm certain you will be able to track those ones down as well. Relevance for this scale in particular, in modern times, not so much. No. But still a fascinating thing, a fascinating way of approaching your sexuality. With limitations, yes. But in Dan's case, coming out to his friends and explaining to them rather, that he is a Kinsey 5, which, as memory serves, is almost exclusively homosexual with incidental heterosexuality, the same as me. I think that's quite cool. I think that's very useful, and I think that doing it that way is maybe going to be a little easier for some people to take, rather than just saying, I'm gay, because saying I'm gay is an absolute, it's a definite, and there are always going to be preconceived notions of that absolute and that definite. I do feel, as I always feel, that I have rambled somewhat in this video, but hopefully I've been able to get my point across. That is that the Kinsey Scale is quite definitely out of date, but it's still a useful talking point, and an interesting talking point, and I would be quite happy to see more people use it in conversation, you know, at parties and things, to get people to open their minds a little bit about sexuality, and to try and appreciate that it really is something which is fluid, and not as rigid as a lot of people would have you believe. So Dan, I hope I have answered your question. Thank you so much for writing. As you guys can tell, I am back in the business of answering questions that you email me. I have received a lot in the past couple of days, and I promise you I am going to get to them. I am going to be filming quite a few in this sitting, so you can look forward to another video from me very soon. Until next time, my name is Victoria Vogue. Remember to keep calm and carry on.